Got a thumbs up? Here's the English version of a YouTube hook plus call to action I wrote for you in Thai. Hashtag directed powerful hook opening line. Have you ever heard footsteps behind you while knowing you were completely alone? Because tonight's story doesn't end with just footsteps. Hashtag high voltage suspense build plus call to action right as suspense begins. And if you want to know what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss more terrifying true stories like this one. And drop a comment below telling me what kind of horror story you want to hear next. Backhand index pointing right this hook is designed to instantly grab curiosity, while the CTA is placed exactly when suspense kicks in, making viewers far more likely to stay until the end. Would you like me to also create 2, 3 alternate English hook styles, like short punchy version, creepy question version, and cinematic description version, so you can test which one engages your audience best? Here's a full cinematic YouTube script based on your story idea. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was alone, ***, written exactly in the style you requested. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script. Hashtag 1. Powerful hook. Have you ever felt someone following you, but when you turn around, no one's there? That night, I didn't just feel it. I heard it. Hashtag 2. Suspenseful setup. It started as an ordinary walk home. Quiet streets. Dim street lights flickering like they were dying. The kind of silence where even your own breathing feels too loud. But then, a single sound broke it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Behind me. I froze. Turned. Nothing. Just empty pavement stretching into the dark. Still, I knew I wasn't alone. Hashtag 3. Build up. Every step I took, the sound followed, perfectly in rhythm, like a shadow that breathed. I quickened my pace. The footsteps quickened too. The hairs on my neck stood straight. My chest tightened, every breath shallow. I told myself, maybe it's just in my head. Maybe it's the echo of my own shoes. But echoes don't whisper, and I swear I heard a faint breath right behind me. Hashtag 4. Mid-story CTA. If you're hooked already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more chilling stories like this. Because what happened next still haunts me to this day. Hashtag 5. Main climax. I reached the corner, desperate to escape the open street. But as I turned, I caught it, out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, too tall, too still, standing where no one should have been. I blinked, gone, and then the footsteps started again. But this time, they weren't behind me. They were right beside me. Hashtag 6. Cliffhanger ending. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't run. All I could do was listen, because in the silence of that night, a voice whispered my name. To be continued. Perfect. Let's keep the cinematic flow and pick up exactly where we left off. Here's part 2 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was alone, Asterisk. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script. Part 2. Hashtag recap hook. A voice whispered my name in the dark, but there was no one beside me. At least, no one I could see. Hashtag suspenseful setup. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air felt colder, like the street itself was breathing down my neck. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't, because something told me if I made a sound, it would answer back. Hashtag build up. I forced myself to keep walking, one step at a time, eyes forward. Don't look, don't turn. But then, a second set of footsteps began, not behind me, not beside me, above me, like someone was walking on the rooftops, tracking me, step for step. I finally broke. I ran. My lungs burned. My legs shook. But no matter how fast I pushed forward, the footsteps matched me, one on the ground, one in the air, until they stopped, dead silent, and that silence was worse than the sound. Hashtag mid-story CTA. If you're still with me, hit subscribe, because what happened in the next 30 seconds is the part I've never told anyone before. Hashtag main climax. I reach my front door, fumbling for the keys, hands trembling, sweat dripping into my eyes. And then a reflection caught me in the glass. Not mine. Behind me, a tall figure. No face, just a shape darker than the night itself. It leaned closer, close enough that I felt breath, icy and sharp, against my ear. And it whispered again, not my name this time, but something worse. It said, asterisk, you can't run from me. Asterisk. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. My door finally swung open. I stumbled inside, locked it, but when I turned, the sound of footsteps echoed inside my house. To be continued. Got it. Let's dive straight into part 3 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was alone, Star. We'll keep the tension escalating, cinematic pacing, and finish on another cliffhanger that demands part 4. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script, part 3. Hashtag recap hook. I locked the door, but the footsteps were inside, with me. Hashtag suspenseful setup. The air in my living room felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like I was breathing through water. Every sound in the house was amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of what beneath my feet. And then, those steps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. Hashtag build up. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find. A lamp. Pathetic. But it was all I had. Who's there? My voice cracked. No answer. Just silence. Followed by the faint sound of whispering. A language I couldn't understand. Low. Guttural. Like it was crawling out of the walls themselves. The light flickered. And in that half-second of darkness, I saw it. A figure. Standing at the end of the hall. Unmoving. Watching. Hashtag mid-story CTA. If this already has your skin crawling, hit subscribe, because what happened next will stay with you long after this video ends. Hashtag main climax. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The whispers stopped. The house fell into dead silence. I thought, maybe, just maybe, I had imagined it, until the lamp in my hand shattered. Like something had ripped it out of my grip, and then a voice hissed inches from my ear. Asterisk, you let me in. Asterisk. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. The floorboards behind me groaned under a weight that wasn't mine. I turned slowly, and what I saw standing there wasn't human. To be continued. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script, part 4. Hashtag recap hook. I turned, and what I saw standing there wasn't human. Hashtag suspenseful setup. Its body filled the hallway. Too tall, arms too long, dragging against the walls. Skin like wet ash, glistening in the dim light. But the face, or the lack of one, was the worst part. No eyes, no mouth, just a void. A hole in the world, shaped like a man. Hashtag build up. I stumbled back, my breath tearing out of me. Get out! I screamed, but the thing didn't move. It only tilted its head, as if it was studying me, learning me. Then the whispers started again, but this time they were inside my skull, crawling behind my eyes. Each word burrowed deeper, until I thought my head would split apart. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, but the whispers only grew louder. And then in a single voice, clear, sharp, it said, asterisk, you brought me home. Asterisk. Hashtag mid-story CTA. If you're still watching, make sure to subscribe, because the nightmare is just getting started. Hashtag main climax. The lights in my house flickered violently. Shadows twisted across the walls. And one by one, the pictures on my shelves fell, smashing to the floor. I crawled backwards, desperate to reach the door. But when I turned to grab the handle, It wasn't there. The door was gone, just a solid wall. And in the reflection of the broken glass around me, I saw it. The faceless thing wasn't alone anymore. There were more of them, dozens, crawling out of the walls, dragging themselves across the floor, all whispering the same words. Asterisk, you let us in. Asterisk. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag cliffhanger ending. My vision blurred. My body froze. And as the darkness swallowed the room, the last thing I felt was a cold, skeletal hand closing around my throat. To be continued. All right, let's turn the nightmare darker and keep momentum. Here's part 7 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was alone, star. Hashtag studio microphone, YouTube voiceover script, part 7. Hashtag recap hook. I was trapped in the coffin of my own mind, while something else walked in my body. Hashtag suspenseful setup. The next morning, I felt my eyes open, but the world didn't feel the same. Colors looked wrong. Too bright, too sharp, like I was seeing through a predator's gaze. And my hands didn't shake like they used to. They were steady, too steady, like a hunter. Hashtag build up. I watched helpless as my body stood in front of the mirror. It tilted my head, studied my face, and then it smiled. But it wasn't my smile. It was stretched, too wide, too long, like the skin didn't fit right. I screamed inside my coffin, but my reflection didn't hear me. Instead, my mouth whispered, Asterisk, he's almost gone. Soon, I'll be the only one left. Asterisk. Hashtag mid-story CTA. If this story has you hooked, make sure to subscribe, because what this thing did next was worse than anything I ever imagined. Hashtag main climax. That night, I felt my body leave the house, walking calmly down the street, past neighbors, past friends, all of them smiling, waving, thinking it was me. But inside, I could feel the hunger, the craving building, until it finally stopped in front of a door, a house I recognized, my best friend's. The knock was gentle, too polite. When the door opened, my best friend smiled. Hey man, what's up? And my mouth answered, Asterisk, I just wanted to see you one last time. Asterisk. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. I screamed, fighting with everything I had, but the coffin walls only pressed tighter. My friend stepped aside, letting me in. The door shut behind us. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't safe. To be continued. Got it. Let's keep the possession art alive and twist the knife deeper. Here's part 8 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was alone, star. Hashtag studio microphone, YouTube voiceover script, part 8. Hashtag recap hook. I stepped into my best friend's house, but it wasn't me anymore. And deep inside, I knew he wasn't safe. Hashtag suspenseful setup. He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. You look pale, man. Rough night. If only he knew. If only he saw what I saw. Because through my eyes, the room wasn't just a living room. The walls dripped. The floor pulsed like flesh. And shadows crawled in every corner. But to him, it was just home. Hashtag build up. He poured me a drink. We sat, talked. At least, he talked. Because the thing wearing my skin only listened. Smiling, nodding, tilting its head too slowly. Every word he spoke, I could feel its hunger rising. Like each laugh, each memory, was sharpening the knife it held inside my chest. And then, my mouth moved, but it wasn't my voice. Asterisk, you trust me, don't you? Asterisk. He chuckled. Of course. You're my brother. And that's when I knew it was going to kill him. Hashtag mid-story CTA. If you're still here, subscribe now. Because what happens next is the part that turns this from a ghost story into something much darker. Hashtag main climax. The thing stood up, stretching my body like it was testing the muscles. It walked toward the kitchen. My friend followed, joking about midnight snacks. But the moment he turned his back, my hand reached for the knife block. Slow, precise, deliberate. I screamed inside, pounding against the coffin, begging my body to stop. But my reflection in the kitchen window smiled back at me, mocking me, and then in my voice, it whispered to him, asterisk, I've been waiting for this. Asterisk. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. The knife rose into the air. My best friend laughed, thinking it was a joke, but when he saw my face, his smile vanished, and just before the blade came down, the lights in the house went out. Pitch black, only the sound of footsteps, circling both of us. To be continued. All right, let's continue the nightmare exactly where we left off. Here's part 9 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was a lone star. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script, part 9. Hashtag recap hook. The knife was raised. My best friend's smile had vanished. And then the lights went out. Darkness. Total. Silent. Except for footsteps circling us. Hashtag suspenseful setup. I couldn't see. Neither could he. But I could feel it. The entity. Moving us like pieces on a board. My body didn't lunge. It didn't strike. Instead, it lowered the knife. Because this wasn't about killing quickly. It wanted something worse. Hashtag build up. In the dark, my friend whispered, "Hey, what's going on? This isn't funny." I screamed inside. I wanted to warn him, to beg him to run. But instead, my voice, his trusted friend's voice, spoke calmly. Asterisk, don't move. It sees you. Asterisk. The footsteps grew louder, faster, circling tighter and tighter. Then, a whisper, not from me, not from him, from the dark. Asterisk, 2 souls, 1 body choose. Asterisk. Hashtag midstory CTA. If you're still with me, hit subscribe, because what the entity forced us to do next was beyond anything I could have imagined. Hashtag main climax. The lights flickered back on, and in that instant, I saw him, my best friend, frozen in place, eyes wide with terror. And then I saw me, or rather, what was left of me. The reflection in the kitchen window showed 2 faces sharing my skin, mine and something hollow, stretched over mine like a mask. The entity laughed with my voice and spoke the words that broke me completely. Asterisk, one of you stays. One of you rots. Asterisk. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. The knife was placed in my friend's hands, and the thing inside me whispered to him. Asterisk. Decide who deserves this body. Asterisk. He stared at me, trembling, tears streaming down his face. And I realized the entity wasn't going to kill him. It was going to make him kill me. To be continued. All right, let's push this nightmare forward. Here's part 10 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was a lone star. Hashtag studio microphone YouTube voiceover script, part 10. Hashtag recap hook. The entity placed a knife in my best friend's hands and whispered, asterisk, decide who deserves this body. Asterisk. Hashtag suspenseful setup. His hand shook violently. Tears streaked his face. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something was inside me. Man, this isn't you, he whispered. And for the first time, I saw it. A flicker of recognition. He could sense me. Buried. Trapped. Screaming. Hashtag build up. The entity smiled through my mouth. Mocking. Calm. Asterisk, he's lying. He's already gone. All that's left is me. Asterisk. But my friend's grip tightened on the knife. He wasn't convinced. He stared into my eyes, and I felt him searching for me, for the real me, and for a split second, I pushed through the coffin walls. My voice broke out, raw, desperate. Asterisk, it's me. Don't trust it. Please, asterisk. The moment I spoke, my body convulsed. The entity shrieked, shoving me back down into the dark. But he heard me. I know he did. Hashtag midstory CTA. If you're still here, hit subscribe, because what my best friend chose next would decide if either of us survived that night. Hashtag main climax. He raised the knife, breathing hard, staring at the thing inside me. The entity laughed through my lips. Asterisk, do it. Kill him. End this. And I'll give you power you can't imagine. Asterisk. But then, my friend did something neither of us expected. Instead of driving the blade into me, he turned it on himself, pressing the point against his own chest. Take me instead, he said. You can't have him. For the first time, the entity hesitated. Its smile faltered. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. The house shook. Lights burst. The air split with a scream that didn't belong in this world. And as the knife touched my friend's heart, the entity shrieked through my mouth. Asterisk, then you both will rot. Asterisk, the room collapsed into darkness. To be continued. Perfect. We'll begin moving toward the ending arc. Tighten the tension, but slowly steering this nightmare toward resolution. Here's part 11 of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was a lone star. Hashtag studio microphone, YouTube voiceover script, part 11. Hashtag recap hook. The knife pressed against my friend's chest, and the entity shrieked through my lips. Asterisk, then you both will rot. Asterisk. Hashtag suspenseful setup. The world shattered around us. Walls cracked open like eggshells. Shadows spilled out, flooding the room. I was dragged deeper into the coffin of my own mind. But this time, I wasn't alone, because my friend was pulled down with me. Hashtag build up. We stood together in the dark. No house, no street, just endless black. He turned to me, his face pale, trembling, but his eyes locked on mine. You're still here, he said. I knew it. Before I could answer, the faceless figures emerged. Dozens, hundreds, circling us in silence. And from above, the entity's voice thundered. Asterisk one body, two souls. Choose or both will be erased. Asterisk. Hashtag midstory CTA. If you've stayed with me this far, subscribe now, because this story is beginning to end, and the choice we made in that moment still haunts me. Hashtag main climax. My friend grabbed my arm. No, listen to me. This is your body, your life. Don't let it take you. But I shook my head. It wants a choice. If either of us stays, the other dies. The entity's laughter split the void. Asterisk decide. Asterisk. The figures close in, their hands reaching, their whispers rising like a storm. And then he shoved me backward. Hard. I fell through the dark, through the coffin, through the floor of my own house, back into my body. I gasped. Air filled my lungs again. My chest burned. I was alive. But when I looked up, he wasn't there. Hashtag cliffhanger ending. The house was silent. Empty. But in the reflection of the shattered glass, I saw him, my best friend, standing in the void. Trapped. He smiled faintly and mouthed the words I'll never forget. Asterisk live. For me. Asterisk. The reflection vanished, and I was left alone. To be continued. Understood. Let's bring this chilling tale to a graceful but haunting conclusion, giving closure while leaving a lingering shadow. Here's the final episode/ending of Asterisk. I heard footsteps behind me, but I was a lone star. Hashtag studio microphone, YouTube voiceover script. The ending. Hashtag recap hook. My best friend was gone, taken by the void, and I was left alive, but not free. Hashtag suspenseful setup. The days that followed felt unreal. I woke in my own bed. My house looked the same. The sun rose. Life went on. But nothing was normal, because every reflective surface, a window, a mirror, a glass of water, showed him, my friend, silent, watching, not angry, not vengeful, just there. Hashtag build up. I tried to explain to people. Nobody believed me. How could they? To them, my friend had simply vanished. No evidence, no body, just another name added to the missing persons list. And me, the last one who saw him, looked guilty, suspicious. The police asked questions. But what could I say? That a faceless shadow took him? That his soul traded places with mine? So I said nothing. But I knew the truth. Hashtag main climax. At night, I still hear the footsteps. Sometimes behind me, sometimes beside me, and sometimes inside my own head. And every time I hear them, I wonder, did he really sacrifice himself for me? Or did the entity only trick me, switch places again, and leave him walking in my skin? Because sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I don't see myself anymore. I see the smile, too wide, too long, and it whispers in my voice. Asterisk, you were never meant to leave. Asterisk, hashtag resolution/final note. So if you ever hear footsteps behind you, and you're certain you're alone, don't look back, because some shadows are just waiting for you to notice them. And once you do, they'll follow you home. White heavy check mark the end.